Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to go through 5 things that you're going to want to know if you're making the move from Ontario to Airdrie, Alberta. Now I'm going to try to skip the things that you probably already know about Airdrie and about Alberta and just go into the things that you may not know. So if that sounds interesting, go ahead and quickly hit that like button and let's get into it. Alright, well, a couple things that you likely already know about Alberta that we're not going to dive into too much in this video, but they might be the reasons that you're making your move out here is number 1, the housing is so much more affordable in Alberta and in Airdrie in particular than it is in a lot of places in Ontario right now. You probably already know that, and it very well could be one of your top reasons for making your move or for purchasing your property out here in Airdrie. And the next thing that you probably already know is that there's a lot of outdoor activities around Alberta with the mountains so close by, whether you're in the winter or the summer. There's lots to do. You already know that, so we're not going to go into that. So for now, let's just jump into our 5 things that you might not know about Airdrie and Alberta. Alright, well, let's start with number 1, and these aren't in any particular order, there just is 5 of them in total. So number 1, what I've heard from my clients who've moved from Ontario to Alberta is that people in Alberta are just generally more nice and more patient people. Now, I don't know this for sure because I've never made the move from Ontario to Alberta, but every single one of my clients who's made that move has told me this exact same thing. Certain things like people will hold the door open for you or say hi to you on the street, or the cashier at the grocery store might actually make a conversation with you. These things are, I guess, not very common in Ontario, but here we get it all the time. Another example of this is oftentimes you'll see cars stopping for pedestrians, even if those pedestrians aren't at a crosswalk and they're jaywalking and technically not supposed to be able to be walking there. A lot of the times you're going to see cars stop for them, let them get across the road, which also blows the minds of my Ontario clients who've never seen anything like that before. So that's number 1 on our list, and it's the one item that I don't have any facts based around, but it's just something that I've heard from every single one of my clients who's moved from Ontario. Alright, and now moving on to number 2, and that is Alberta in general just has a bit more of an entrepreneurial spirit when it comes to the workforce. About 17% of our workforce is self-employed. That's compared to Ontario's 15%, so not maybe a huge difference, but once you're here, boots on the ground, you are going to notice that entrepreneurial spirit coming out with a lot of people, whether it be their main income or their side income, doing some sort of self-employed business. Now, one thing to note on that is that in BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan, those are the top 3 in the country for self-employed people. So over on the west side of Canada, we are a bit above average when it comes to the amount of people who are self-employed. Alright, and that brings us to number 3 on the list now, which is, for the most part, your taxes are going to be lower here in Alberta than they are in Ontario. Now, if we look at income tax, up until about $100,000 per year, you're going to be taxed slightly less income tax in Ontario than Alberta. Anything above that and your income tax is going to be less in Alberta than it is in Ontario. But one thing we need to consider is the GST and the HST that both provinces see. Now in Alberta, we only have a 5% sales tax on the goods and services that you're going to buy on a day-to-day basis compared to Ontario's 13%. So over the course of a year, that's really going to add up in all the different purchases that you make to where even if you do make less than $100,000 here in Alberta, your overall tax is likely still going to be less once you calculate in that sales tax. Alright, and now moving on to number 4, which will be some additional information about the real estate here in Airdrie and Alberta that you might not know coming from Ontario. And the first up is going to be our property tax. Now, very likely you're going to be paying less property tax here in Airdrie compared to where you're coming from in Ontario. And this is on a couple fronts. One is going to be the actual tax rate, where here in Airdrie it's 0.749% of your assessed value. Now, I did a bit of digging for towns and cities in Ontario, and they ranged anywhere from 0.68% all the way up to a full percent of your assessed value. So it can be pretty close, or it can be significantly higher for that tax rate in Ontario. But where you're really going to see the savings here is that your assessed value is a lot less than it's going to be pretty much anywhere in Ontario. So the amount of actual dollars that you pay out of pocket for taxes each year on your property is going to be quite a bit less here in Airdrie. Now, continuing on with real estate taxes, in Ontario, you're probably well aware that you pay a land transfer tax anytime that land transfers hands. And that can be a varying amount, tiering up as the property gets more expensive. For example, if the property is between $250,000 to $400,000, you're going to pay a 1.5% land transfer tax on that purchase price. If the property is between $400,000 and $2 million, you're going to pay a 2% land transfer tax on that purchase price. And for any amount above $2 million, you're going to pay 2.5% for that land transfer tax. Now, it does also tier for lower than $250,000, but let's be honest, you're not getting a single thing in Ontario for under $250,000. So now that we know Ontario's land transfer tax, what is Alberta's land transfer tax? Well, the answer there is zero. We have no land transfer tax in Alberta. So whether you're selling, buying, whatever you're doing with your real estate, if it's transferring hands, there is no tax involved in that. So you are going to save a huge amount of money there. For example, on a $500,000 house in Ontario, that land transfer tax is going to be $10,000. Or a $1 million house in Ontario, that land transfer tax is going to be about $20,000 compared to Alberta's zero. So big difference there, and something you might not know. I know a lot of Albertans don't even know that there is such thing as a land transfer tax, but when you're coming from Ontario, you are well aware of that tax. Now, one last thing as it pertains to real estate here in Alberta that'll differ from Ontario is that your utilities you're going to be spending a little bit more money on each month. When it comes to gas and electricity, your bill is likely going to be slightly higher out here in Alberta as compared to your usage in Ontario. And one other thing that a lot of people coming to Airdrie from Ontario don't know is that here in Airdrie you do pay a monthly fee for your water, sewer, and garbage collection. So that is going to be about $100 to $120 a month depending on your property and your water usage that you will pay each month for those services. Alright, and that brings us to number 5 on the list, which is the last item that we have to talk about, and that is the weather here in Airdrie. Now, one thing to know here in Airdrie is that our most damaging form of weather that we get out here is hail, and you'll see that primarily in the spring and summertime. So you want to make sure that you are insured for hail damages. There's a good chance that, over the next 5, 10, 15 years, there might be a storm that comes through that you get a bit of damage from. Now, for our winters here in Airdrie, we can get quite cold. So one difference that you'll notice if you're coming from Ontario is that we use a lot less salt on the roads. We use a lot more gravel and things like that because a lot of the times it's too cold for that salt to even work. I think most cases it's good up until down to -15 or something like that. So around here, if it's colder than that, that salt's not going to work, so they don't use it because it's not very effective. So you see sand or gravel used out here a lot, but a lot less salt put down on the roads in the winter. But combating that cold in the winter, we do get Chinooks out here. So every so often you're going to get a warm wind coming down through the mountains that's going to sweep across southern Alberta, and that's going to warm things up, melt a lot of the snow we have. So you'll find here in Airdrie and in southern Alberta in general, we'll get a bunch of snow, and then it'll warm up and melt for a bit, and then we'll get more snow. It doesn't keep building up through the winter, and that's all from the Chinooks that we get. Now, one thing to note with the Chinooks is that some people do get headaches when those Chinooks come in. I know my wife gets headaches usually the day of or the day before a Chinook comes, and quite a few people actually see that effect on their body. So just one thing to be aware of when you're coming here is that might be something that you end up dealing with as well. Now, one last thing about the weather here in Alberta is that Calgary is actually the sunniest city in Canada, and Edmonton's not far behind, but since Airdrie is so close to Calgary, we get all that sun as well. So you could say Airdrie is one of the sunniest cities in Canada, which even though it might be cold in the winter, it tends to keep that seasonal depression away because the sun's shining, it's bright out, and it's not dark and gloomy like you might expect a winter to be. Well, that does it for our 5 things that you might not know about Airdrie and Alberta if you're making the move from Ontario. Again, if you like this video, scroll down and hit that like button for me. It really helps me out. And if you like these updates on Airdrie, on real estate here, go ahead and subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss any future videos. And before we finish here, just a few logistical notes about making your move from Ontario is that once you do make your move here, you're going to want to transfer your driver's license. You've got 90 days to do that once you move here. You also want to transfer your health care. Again, you've got 90 days to do that. And if you are planning a move here, be sure to book your movers early. So jump on that. If that move is a couple months, few months, 6 months out, get those movers booked in as early as you possibly can, because we have a lot of people coming from Ontario and moving to Alberta right now. So a lot of these movers are very busy. So make sure you get that booked up. And also, depending on your reason for your move from Ontario here to Airdrie, you might actually be able to claim the expenses of your move on your taxes. So be aware of that. Make sure you do some research, because you might be able to claim those on your taxes at the end of the day. All right, well, that's all we have for this video. My name is Brad Walker. I'm a realtor with Real Broker here in Airdrie. If you are planning a move here from Ontario, absolutely feel free to reach out, comment below, or reach out through all my contact information that is below, and I'd be more than happy to help. See you later.